Come on, let's do this!
Who made you president? Watch that movement!
It would seem that you are not the only one interested in what lies beyond those walls. Go open the gate.
The Division 2 isn't that far away from release now, and as you might have seen from an earlier video of mine, there are some big changes coming to PvP. So many in fact that I spent the entire video talking about what was different and didn't get the chance to talk about what I liked and what I didn't. So in order to give you a read on whether I think The Division 2 is going to be any good or not, may I humbly present 6 things I liked about The Division 2's PvP and 1 thing I didn't. First up, Washington DC works much better than I thought it would. When I first played The Division, I was really drawn in by the wintry setting. I thought it was a bold choice to make a game people would ideally be playing all year round, especially one that launched in March, and basically make sure it was permanently set at Christmas. The freezing streets of New York City really appealed to me though. There was something about the snow and the ice that really helped complement the post-apocalyptic setting. The city felt lonely, more abandoned, and with the way snow deadened sound, it felt like every gunshot would ring out all the louder. Playing in this wintry cityscape, one frozen quite literally in time just before a big festival of togetherness that would now never arrive, that really became an integral part of the experience for me. So when I realised The Division 2 would be set not only in Washington DC, but in the summertime, I was not only disappointed, I was worried too. I was also concerned about how many bubble hats were likely to feature as part of the game's gear offering, but that's a story for another time. Happily though, DC really does work. Granted, its rubbish-covered streets may not have grabbed me in quite the same way, but the variety in design happily makes up for the lack of snow. As well as a few different biomes, Washington DC's different neighbourhoods change how the game's cover-based shooting plays out. Pennsylvania Avenue, leading to Congress, is almost grotesquely wide, and the abandoned cars turn into a jagged nightmare maze of flanking routes and hidden corners. That, and it's the perfect place to do the Macarena while you're waiting for the demo session to kick off properly. Dark Zone East's Union Station, meanwhile, is characterised by big open squares with long lines of sight, making it harder to hide from other agents, or far easier to pick them off from afar, if that's more your cup of tea. More on the Dark Zone in a bit. And then there's Georgetown, seen here as a multiplayer skirmish map. Georgetown, being one of the oldest parts of DC, is much tighter in its construction, with narrow streets and handy balconies leading to a tight and tactical match that's all about getting a good line of sight from the little space you have. It's a very interesting city, in other words, and while the New York City of The Division certainly wasn't lacking in variation, Ubisoft Massive certainly seems to be pushing things that little bit further for the sequel. Now, I mentioned playing Skirmish in Georgetown a minute ago, and indeed, that's the second thing I'd like to highlight as having been particularly fun during our demo time with The Division 2. As you may have learned from my other video, there will be 3 traditional PvP modes available at launch across 3 maps, the modes being Skirmish, Team Deathmatch, and Domination. In my opinion, Skirmish is easily the best suited to The Division. It's all about whittling away the other team's respawn count and then eliminating any remaining squad members, which works really well with the game's emphasis on finding cover and picking off your enemies from a safe position. See, with Domination, it's all about going to an area and locking it down, which is fine in faster-paced shooters like Call of Duty or Destiny, but for the most part, The Division is about the slow and steady advance. Rushing to a point to claim it often means you find yourself supremely vulnerable, as your opponents are free to move around you and flank to their heart's content, whereas you're rooted to one particular spot. It's counterintuitive to what makes the shooting in The Division good, in other words. Skirmish, on the other hand, leans right into it. The couple of games I played made me really aware that each squad had claimed some turf as their own, and the rest of the match was about nipping at the edges of that territory and testing for a weak spot that might afford the opportunity for a kill. It felt slower than your average multiplayer match, but also a bit more cerebral as well. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not like playing chess at Grandmaster level, but it definitely felt like smart play counted as least as much as Twitch skills. I liked it. More, please. Anyway, on to the third thing I liked about the Division 2's PvP, namely that the Dark Zone is still really tense. As you might have seen, some big changes are coming to the Dark Zone in that stats are going to be normalised, at least in 2 of the game's 3 Dark Zones. Anyway, the idea behind this is to afford a bit more of a level playing field and make the Dark Zone more accessible. Since this became public knowledge, some fans have voiced concern, fearing it might pull the teeth from the Division's murky, treacherous bad place. Happily, at least as far as I experienced, that sense of tension is still very much there. Seeing other agents and wondering whether it's worth trying to kill them and take their loot is still a great moment of tension, and, at least in my opinion, knowing the sides are relatively well balanced, or having to hold a button to toggle rogue status on, didn't really do anything to diminish that. I can see where people are coming from, but at least in my time with the Dark Zone, the tension that made the first game so memorable felt alive and well. And if it doesn't appeal, there's always the classic stat play of the occupied Dark Zone to give you the original rule set back. Sticking with the Dark Zone, actually, the next thing I liked is that there are more options on going rogue than straight up murder killing another agent. Perfect for anybody who likes a bit of skullduggery, but doesn't always feel like blowing someone's head off. There's a new soft rogue status, in other words, one that lets you hack into network nodes or crack open loot crates to pinch a bunch of gear for yourself, all of which sticks a grey skull over your head. So basically you've gone rogue and you're reaping the rewards, but you haven't had to try and take out another player in order to get there. Continuing to pursue these pesky rogue tasks eventually unlocks a new safe house called the Thieves' Den, which is a pretty good reason to get your hands dirty. It's a way of tempting players into the rogue loop where they might otherwise be cautious, in other words, and I think it's pretty smart. The next thing I liked about the Division 2's PvP is that emotes haven't gone anywhere. One of the best things about playing the Division with friends was that at any time while fighting your way across this grim, frozen hellscape, you could stop and applaud sarcastically, or start doing jumping jacks, or start waving for help. Golf clapping at the end of an enormous fight swiftly became my favourite thing to do in the Division, which is why I'm glad emotes have made a triumphant return. If the preview build I tried is anything to go on, the Macarena is freely available this time round, which is interesting. It was a rare emote in the Division, which leads me to believe there are probably going to be some brand new emotes to unlock in the sequel. With any luck, anyway. So the sixth thing I liked about the Division 2 is that it feels familiar. The cover-based shooting, cover transfers, the abilities and special bits of gear all felt pretty good to me in the first game, and adjusting to the sequel took a matter of seconds. It's good to know that the ambitious design of Washington DC hasn't taken any of the polish out of things. That said, while having a familiar experience is by no means a bad thing for the sequel, it's in this same area that we come to the thing I didn't like about my time with the Division 2's PvP, and it's a thing that's been playing on my mind ever since because, well, if anything, it's too familiar. The action, the enemies, the weapons and the equipment all felt so familiar that it didn't really feel like I was playing a sequel at all. At one point we got to play around with level 30 agents and their associated specialisations, and those were fun, don't get me wrong, but those are things that are only unlocked for the end game. You still need to grind your way through the earlier levels in order to get your hands on that extra equipment. I really enjoyed playing the Division 2, but it didn't blow me away as I thought it might. Granted, this was based off just a few hours of playtime, and the finished game may well end up surprising me, but for the time being it feels so familiar that I'm slightly concerned. I'm definitely up for more Division, and I think focusing on the new city and the restructured Dark Zones was a smart move, but I guess I was expecting a bit more innovation in the way the core experience plays out, and I've yet to be convinced that innovation is there. That's my take on things anyway, but what do you think? Are you excited for the Division 2? Let us know in the comments. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, there are loads more for you to watch. Some of them should be on screen now, so give one of those a click if you fancy. Do like, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss anything else from Eurogamer, but most importantly, thank you very much for watching and have a lovely day.